I was standing in the middle of Target, my week-old C-section still burning, when my husband looked right into my eyes and introduced me to his beautiful young mistress as his neighbor. He smiled smugly, thinking he had me backed into a corner. He thought, because I was on unpaid maternity leave, he could steal my son and throw me out on the street. But my arrogant husband didn't realize that everything he had was built 70% on my help and the remaining 30% on my pity. Do you want to know how I destroyed his entire life in exactly 24 hours before we begin? Hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. The surgical tape pulled against my skin with the raw, burning intensity of a lit match. 7 days. It had been exactly 7 days since the doctor sliced through my abdomen to bring my son into the world. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the granite countertop. My breath came in shallow, carefully measured gasps. In the living room, the bright, synthetic laughter of a daytime talk show blared from the television screen. Susan, my mother-in-law, was stretched out on my beige sectional sofa. Her feet rested comfortably on the mahogany coffee table. She hadn't moved from that spot since 8 o'clock this morning. "Lydia," she called out, not bothering to lower the volume of the TV or turn her head. "The downstairs bathroom is out of toilet paper, and we're down to the last 3 diapers in the nursery box." I closed my eyes. A dull ache throbbed behind my temples. "I ordered a delivery box from Amazon yesterday, Susan. It should be here by tomorrow afternoon." "Tomorrow," Susan huffed. She finally shifted, letting her reading glasses slide down the bridge of her nose. She looked at me over the rims, her eyes scanning my loose sweatpants and the oversized t-shirt I hadn't changed in 2 days. "Babies don't wait for Amazon, sweetie. You need to run to Target. It's barely a 10-minute drive." I pressed my hand against my lower stomach. The heavy ache inside felt like my organs were still trying to find their proper places. "I'm not supposed to drive yet. The doctor said at least 2 weeks." Susan let out a short, dismissive laugh. It was the kind of laugh that didn't hold a trace of actual humor. She picked up a glossy magazine from the cushion next to her and flipped a page. "Oh, doctors say a lot of things to coddle you modern girls." Susan said, her voice dripping with that signature suffocating sweetness. "When I had Mark, I was carrying laundry baskets down 2 flights of stairs on the 2nd day. You just had a simple C-section. Walking around is good for the scar tissue. There's really no point in laying around letting your muscles turn to mush." A sharp reply clawed at my throat. I wanted to tell her that a C-section was major abdominal surgery. I wanted to tell her to get off my couch and drive her own car to the store. But from the bassinet tucked in the corner of the room, a soft whimper broke the silence. My son was stirring. If I argued, Susan would raise her voice. If she raised her voice, the baby would wake up crying. And above all else, I needed peace for him. "Fine," I whispered, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. "I'll go." I grabbed my keys from the kitchen island. Each step toward the attached garage sent a fresh wave of stinging pain across my lower abdomen. The air inside the garage was stale. I opened the door of Mark's silver SUV. My smaller sedan was in the shop, and Mark had insisted on taking the commuter train to the city this week to save gas. I slowly lowered myself into the driver's seat. Before I could insert the key into the ignition, my gaze drifted to the passenger side. Tucked into the cup holder was a discarded paper coffee cup. It wasn't the cup that made my chest tighten. It was the faint, unmistakable smudge of berry-colored lipstick on the plastic lid. I don't wear lipstick. I hadn't worn makeup in weeks. My fingers gripped the leather steering wheel. The smooth surface grew warm under my tight grasp. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, my mind snapped back to a humid Tuesday night exactly 4 weeks ago. I had been 8 months pregnant, my ankles swollen, standing in this exact garage. I had confronted Mark about a series of late-night texts popping up on his phone from an unsaved number. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try to lie. Mark had simply reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thick, embossed business card, and tossed it onto the hood of the car. It was the card of a high-end family law attorney. "Listen to me very carefully, Lydia," Mark had said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "You're on unpaid maternity leave. You have zero income right now. I pay the rent on this house. I provide the insurance. If you make a scene, if you try to ruin my life, I will take you to court. And no judge in this state is going to hand a newborn over to an unemployed, unstable mother. You'll be out on the street and you will never see the kid." The memory echoed in the quiet garage loud enough to make my ears ring. Back then, the terror of losing my unborn child had paralyzed me. I had swallowed the betrayal. I had lowered my head and let him win, convincing myself that a broken home was better than no home for my baby. I reached out and picked up the paper coffee cup. The berry lipstick stain stared back at me. A fresh, sharp pain radiated from my incision, grounding me in the present. I tossed the cup into the trash bin against the garage wall. I started the engine, shifted into reverse, and backed out of the driveway. The midday sun glared through the windshield as I drove toward the Target Plaza. The parking lot was packed, forcing me to park near the back. By the time I walked through the sliding automatic doors, a thin layer of cold sweat coated my forehead. I grabbed a red plastic shopping cart, leaning heavily onto the handle. The plastic pressed against my palms as I used it like a walker, carefully navigating past the checkout lanes. "Just get the diapers. Get the toilet paper. Go home." I repeated the mantra in my head with every slow, deliberate step. I turned the corner into the home goods aisle, keeping my eyes fixed on the towering shelves of paper products. But my cart slowed to a halt. The squeak of the wheels died out. The background noise of the store, the beeping registers, the chatter of shoppers, the soft overhead music faded into a muffled buzz. About 30 feet away, standing near a display of expensive Egyptian cotton bedsheets, was Mark. He wasn't at his office in the city. He wasn't sitting in a stressful meeting. He was laughing. A bright, unburdened laugh I hadn't heard inside our house for months. And standing right beside him, holding up a set of silk pillowcases with a playful smile, was a young, striking woman. My breath caught in my throat. I stood perfectly still, my knuckles turning white around the handle of the red cart. The fluorescent lights of the Target aisle suddenly felt blinding. I pushed the red plastic cart a few feet closer, my rubber-soled sneakers silent on the polished linoleum floor. I stopped behind a display of decorative throw pillows, perfectly concealed, yet close enough to hear the soft cadence of their voices. The woman standing next to my husband was flawless. She had a sleek, salon-perfect blowout that cascaded over the collar of a tailored ivory blazer. The scent of an expensive, heavy floral perfume drifted through the air, completely overpowering the sterile smell of the store. Mark leaned in close to her. He whispered something near her ear, causing her to let out a bright, melodic laugh. She playfully swatted his chest with a glossy pink shopping bag. The Victoria's Secret logo was emblazoned across the paper, the tissue paper inside overflowing, hinting at the expensive lace hidden underneath. "The silk pillowcases are a must," Mark said, his voice smooth and rich, the exact tone he used when closing a massive sales deal. "Your skin deserves the best, Jess." "You spoil me," she murmured, resting her hand on his bicep. They stepped up to the self-checkout register at the end of the aisle. I watched, my chest tight and burning, as Mark reached into the inner pocket of his designer jacket. He pulled out a sleek metallic blue card, the Chase Sapphire Preferred card, our joint credit card, the one linked directly to the savings account we supposedly reserved for emergency home repairs and hospital bills. He tapped the card against the reader. A cheerful beep echoed through the quiet aisle. My knuckles gripped the handle of my cart so tightly that my joints ached. The raw, stinging pain radiating from my C-section scar was completely eclipsed by the hollow dropping sensation in my gut. I didn't plan my next move. My body simply pushed the heavy cart forward, stepping out from behind the display. The squeak of the front left wheel sounded like a siren. Mark turned his head, his eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, the air left the room. A normal man, a man with a shred of conscience or fear, would have dropped the bags. He would have turned pale, stammered, or physically stepped away from his mistress. But Mark was not a normal man. I watched his eyes quickly scan me from head to toe. He took in my messy top knot, the dark, exhausted bags under my eyes, and the faded gray maternity sweatpants. He noticed my white-knuckled grip on the cart filled with nothing but jumbo boxes of diapers and generic toilet paper. He remembered the invisible leash he had securely wrapped around my neck, the threat of the ruthless family lawyer, the custody battle, my current lack of a paycheck. The brief flash of surprise in Mark's eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. His shoulders relaxed. A slow, chillingly polite smile spread across his handsome face. Instead of pulling away from the woman, Mark actually shifted his weight, resting his hand comfortably on the small of her back. He guided her, turning her body so they were both facing me. "Oh, hey there, May." Mark called out, his voice practically dripping with casual, friendly warmth. I froze. The cart stopped inches from them. My heartbeat thundered in my ears so loud I could barely hear the background music playing overhead. "Jessica," Mark said smoothly, looking down at the beautiful woman beside him. "I'd love to introduce you. This is Lydia. She's a neighbor from my subdivision." The word hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Neighbor. "Lydia, this is Jessica, a colleague of mine from the corporate office." Mark continued, his tone perfectly steady. He then let out a soft, sympathetic chuckle, offering an apologetic glance to Jessica. "Lydia looks a little exhausted today. She just had a baby last week. New motherhood is rough, isn't it?" Jessica's perfectly manicured features softened into an expression of polite pity. She offered me a bright, flawless smile. "Oh, congratulations, that's so wonderful. I can't even imagine how tired you must be." I stood rooted to the linoleum floor. The urge to scream, to flip the shopping cart, to grab the collar of Mark's perfectly pressed shirt and drag him to the ground, was a living, breathing fire inside my chest. But then I saw it. The slight, arrogant tilt of Mark's chin. The daring glint in his dark eyes. "Do it." His eyes silently taunted me. "Make a scene. Scream like a crazy hormonal woman in the middle of a target. Give me the perfect ammunition for the judge." The fire in my chest instantly turned to ice. If I lost control now, I lost my son. I took a slow, shallow breath, forcing the agonizing pain in my abdomen to the back of my mind. I looked at Jessica's extended, perfectly manicured hand. I didn't take it. Instead, I forced the corners of my mouth to curve upward into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you," I said. My voice was eerily calm, carrying a hollow, metallic edge. I shifted my gaze from the young woman and stared directly into Mark's dark, arrogant eyes. "And nice to meet you." "Yes, just a neighbor." Mark's smile faltered for a microsecond. He hadn't expected the icy composure. He expected tears, a breakdown, or a chaotic retreat. "Well, we should let you get back to your errands," Mark said briskly, his hand tightening slightly on Jessica's waist. "Take care, Lydia. Tell the family I said hello." "Have a good day," Jessica chirped, completely oblivious to the silent, violent war happening right in front of her. They turned and walked toward the sliding glass exit doors. Mark held the silk pillowcases in one hand, the Victoria's Secret bag swinging casually from his wrist. I didn't turn around to watch them leave. I stood perfectly still, staring at the empty self-checkout register. Deep inside my pocket, my phone vibrated with a short, sharp buzz. I slowly let go of the cart with one hand and pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with an automated text alert from Chase Bank. "Transaction alert: $214.50 spent at Target. Available credit line: $1,400. I stared at the glowing numbers until my vision blurred. I didn't wipe the tears that spilled over my lashes. I just slid the phone back into my pocket, gripped the plastic handle of the cart, and pushed it toward the diaper aisle. Mark thought he had just won the ultimate victory. He thought he had broken me completely. But as I grabbed a box of newborn diapers, a terrifying quiet clarity settled over my mind. He hadn't broken me. He had just set me completely, irreversibly free. I parked the SUV in the garage and shifted the gear into park. I didn't turn off the engine right away. The low hum of the air conditioner filled the enclosed space. I stared at the glowing digital clock on the dashboard. 2:14 p.m. I took my hands off the steering wheel. And then the dam broke. I didn't scream, but the sobs that ripped through my chest were violent and breathless. I buried my face in my hands, letting the agonizing cocktail of betrayal, physical pain, and utter humiliation wash over me. The image of Mark's hand on Jessica's waist burned behind my eyelids. The chilling sound of him calling me a neighbor echoed in my ears. I cried for the family I thought I was building. I cried for the terrifying vulnerability of being a woman with a 1-week-old baby and a healing surgical wound trapped in a game with a man who held all the cards. I let the tears fall freely. For exactly 10 minutes. At 2:24 p.m., I reached into the center console and pulled out a tissue. I wiped my face dry. I flipped down the sun visor, opened the mirror, and stared at my bloodshot eyes. I took a deep, shuddering breath, holding it in for 4 seconds before letting it out slowly. Done. The victim I was 10 minutes ago was gone. She had to be. I turned off the engine, grabbed the jumbo box of diapers from the back seat, and walked toward the door leading into the kitchen. I turned the doorknob slowly, trying not to make a sound. As the door clicked open, a voice drifted from the kitchen island. It was Susan. She was pacing across the hardwood floor, a freshly brewed cup of coffee in one hand, her cell phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, a loud conspiratorial laugh. I froze in the mudroom, remaining perfectly hidden behind the half wall. "Oh, stop worrying, Mark," Susan said into the phone, her tone practically glowing with pride. "I got her out of the house, didn't I? I told her we were out of toilet paper. She's probably wandering around Target right now, clueless as ever." A cold wave of nausea washed over me. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the heavy box of diapers to my chest. "Exactly." Susan continued, taking a sip of her coffee. "You just focus on networking with that new girl from the executive office. You said she works directly for the CEO, right? You need connections to get that regional manager promotion. A real man knows how to seize an opportunity. Don't let a postpartum wife drag you down." She wasn't just turning a blind eye. She was actively clearing the path. My mother-in-law had sent a woman recovering from major surgery to the store, so her son could safely take his mistress shopping with my money. "All right, honey," Susan cooed. "Have fun. I'll make sure Lydia cooks your favorite steak when you get home." She ended the call. I heard her footsteps moving toward the living room, followed by the familiar sound of the television turning back on. I waited 30 seconds. Then I stepped out of the mudroom, walked past the kitchen, and carried the diapers straight upstairs. I didn't look at the living room. I walked into the nursery. My son was fast asleep in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. I stood over him for a moment, gently brushing a soft wisp of hair from his forehead. "He's not taking you," I promised silently. "He thinks I'm powerless. He's wrong." I walked into my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled my phone from my pocket. Before I had stepped out from behind the pillow display at Target, right when the shock had first paralyzed me, a pure survival instinct had kicked in. My trembling hand had lifted my phone and snapped a quick, silent picture. I opened my photo gallery. The picture was slightly blurry, but the details were undeniable. Mark's hand resting intimately on the lower back of the beautiful blonde woman, the Victoria's Secret shopping bag. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to the letter V. Victoria. She wasn't just the CEO of Apex Logistics, the massive corporate firm where Mark worked as a mid-level sales executive. She was my mentor. 4 years ago, when I was a junior data analyst, Victoria had taken me under her wing. We had grown incredibly close. She was the one who threw my baby shower. She was the older sister I never had. And Mark had absolutely no idea. To Mark, Victoria was just the untouchable, intimidating CEO who sat on the top floor. He thought I only knew her name because he talked about her. He thought my career in data analytics was just cute spreadsheet stuff. I attached the photo to a text message. Mark just introduced her to me at Target as his colleague. He called me his neighbor. Do you recognize her? I hit send. I tossed the phone onto the bed and stood up to change out of my sweatpants. I barely had time to pull a clean shirt over my head before the phone began to vibrate violently against the mattress. It wasn't a text back. It was a phone call. I picked it up and swiped the green button. Hello, Lydia. Victoria's voice came through the speaker. There was no friendly greeting, no asking how the baby was doing. Her voice was ice cold, carrying the sharp, terrifying authority of a woman who commanded thousands of employees. Yes, I breathed. The woman in that picture, Victoria said, slowly articulating every single syllable. That is Jessica. She is my brand new executive secretary. She started 3 weeks ago. I closed my eyes. The final puzzle piece snapped perfectly into place. He wasn't just cheating. He was trying to sleep his way up the corporate ladder right under the nose of my best friend. Victoria. I whispered, my voice steadying into a hard metallic edge. I need a favor. I pressed the speakerphone button and set the device on the mattress. Tell me everything, I said, my voice eerily calm. On the other end of the line, Victoria let out a sharp, humorless exhale. Mark has been playing the charismatic bachelor routine for the past month. He took off his wedding ring 2 weeks ago, told the office he was going through a mutual, amicable separation, and that he was moving into a new place soon. I stared at the blank wall opposite my bed. A mutual separation. And Jessica? I asked. She's 24, ambitious, and unfortunately a bit naive. Victoria replied crisply. Mark's been dazzling her with expensive lunches and big promises, but it's not just about her, Lydia. It's about me. What do you mean? He knows Jessica manages my calendar. He knows she has my ear. Victoria explained, the corporate shark in her tone surfacing. He's angling for the regional manager position opening up next month. And ironically, the portfolio he submitted to impress the board. It's full of the data analytics models you built for him when he was overwhelmed last quarter. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. heavily pregnant, organizing his spreadsheet so he wouldn't miss his quotas. He was using my brain to get a promotion, my money to buy his Mistress lingerie, and my fear to keep me quiet. Do you want me to fire him today? Victoria asked. The offer was genuine, laced with a lethal kind of sisterhood. No, I said instantly. Not yet. I heard a low, approving hum from Victoria. Good girl, he's aiming for the regional manager seat. I'm going to let him climb for a few more days. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. We ended the call. The heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on my chest for the last 4 weeks began to lift. I stood up and walked into my walk-in closet. I pushed aside a row of heavy winter coats and knelt in front of a small digital steel safe bolted to the floor. I punched in the 6-digit code. The heavy door clicked open. I ignored the jewelry and the emergency cash. I reached straight for the bottom and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside was a standard residential lease agreement. I flipped to the signature page. There was Mark's messy scrawl, proudly signing as the head of the household, agreeing to pay $1,200 a month to Oak Point Properties, LLC. What Mark didn't know, and what he had never bothered to look into, was that Oak Point Properties, LLC, was a subsidiary holding company owned entirely by my father. My father was a self-made, ruthless businessman who believed in tough love. He refused to hand me a trust fund, but he had quietly purchased this house, allowing us to rent it at a fraction of the market value. Every month, Mark wrote a $1,200 check, puffing his chest out about being the sole provider. Every month, I quietly transferred an additional $2,400 from my personal savings to my father's company to cover the actual mortgage and property taxes. I pulled my phone out again and dialed my father's corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. He picked up on the second ring. "Lydia, is everything all right? How is the baby?" "The baby is perfect, Mr. Sterling," I said, walking over to the bedroom window. "But I need you to draft a document for me today, an immediate 30-day eviction notice for Mark." There was a brief pause on the line, the rustling of paper. "I see. Has there been an incident?" "Adultery," I stated flatly, "and financial abuse." I took a breath, confronting the one demon that still lingered in the back of my mind. "Mr. Sterling, 4 weeks ago, Mark threatened to take full custody of the baby. He said because I'm on unpaid maternity leave, a judge would view me as an unfit, financially unstable mother. He gave me the card of a Shark family lawyer." Mr. Sterling let out a dry, gravelly chuckle. It was the beautiful, dismissive sound of a man who billed $1,000 an hour. "Lydia, your husband is a mid-level sales rep making $80,000 a year," Mr. Sterling said smoothly. "You have documented proof of his infidelity. You have a quiet 8-figure familial backing. And legally, he is a tenant in a property you control. If he tries to file for sole custody, I will personally ensure the judge laughs him out of the courtroom before lunch. He has a 0% chance." The invisible hands that had been choking me for a month finally let go. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since my son was born, the air actually reached my lungs. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Please send the notice via certified mail, but email me a PDF copy tonight." "Consider it done." I hung up the phone. I walked over to my nightstand, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the embossed business card Mark had thrown at me in the garage a month ago. I carried the card to the small paper shredder I kept in my home office. I fed it into the slot. The machine whirred violently, chewing the card into tiny, unrecognizable strips of confetti. I walked out of my bedroom and headed downstairs. The television was still blaring in the living room. Susan was still lying on the couch laughing at a sitcom. I quietly slipped into the kitchen pantry, bypassing the diaper boxes and the paper towels. I reached the bottom shelf. I pulled out a brand new heavy-duty box of black contractor garbage bags. It was past 11 when the heavy oak front door finally opened. I was sitting in the dark nursery, gently rocking my sleeping son. The heavy thud of Mark's leather wingtips hitting the hardwood floor echoed up the stairs. Usually he would try to be quiet. Tonight his footsteps were loud, deliberate, and heavy with arrogance. He pushed open the door to our master bedroom. I placed the baby into his crib, turned on the baby monitor, and walked quietly across the hall. When I entered the bedroom, Mark was unbuttoning his tailored dress shirt. The faint, unmistakable scent of expensive bourbon mixed with the heavy floral perfume from Target hung in the air around him. He didn't look guilty. If anything, he looked annoyed. He glanced at the empty ironing board folded in the corner of the room, then looked at me. "I have a massive presentation tomorrow with the executive team," Mark said, his voice clipped and irritated. "Is it too much to ask for my blue poplin shirt to be pressed? I work 50 hours a week to keep a roof over this family, Lydia. The least you could do is manage the laundry." I stood near the doorframe, my hands tucked into the pockets of my cardigan. I didn't say a word about the blue shirt. I didn't say a word about Jessica. My silence seemed to agitate him. He tossed his wrinkled shirt onto the floor, walking closer to me. The smell of bourbon grew stronger. "Don't get any ideas about what you saw this afternoon," Mark warned, his tone dropping into that familiar, dangerous register. He pointed a finger at me, his dark eyes narrowing. "I'm doing what I have to do to secure a promotion. It's networking. You wouldn't understand how the corporate world works anymore. He took another step, invading my personal space. So let's get one thing straight. You know your place. You stay home, you recover, and you take care of the kid. Piss me off, make a scene, or try to ruin my reputation at the office, and you'll be out on the street with absolutely nothing. And I promise you, Lydia, you will never see the boy again. Do we understand each other? I looked up at his handsome, flushed face. The man I had married was completely gone, replaced by a stranger drunk on his own perceived power. I understand, I whispered. Mark smirked, a look of profound satisfaction settling over his features. Good. Glad we're on the same page. He turned his back to me, stripped down to his boxers, and climbed into bed. Within 10 minutes, the room was filled with the rhythmic, heavy sound of his snoring. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the mattress in the pitch-black room, listening to his breathing. At 2 a.m., I quietly stood up. I walked over to his nightstand, where his silver iPad lay plugged into its charger. Mark had changed his phone password 3 months ago, but he rarely used the iPad. He hadn't bothered to update its security. I unplugged the device and carried it into the master bathroom, closing the door until it just clicked. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and typed in his old passcode, 0101. Our wedding anniversary. The screen unlocked. I bypassed his messages and went straight to his primary email app. I typed the word receipt into the search bar. Dozens of restaurant bills and Uber rides populated the screen. But the third email down, timestamped from 2 days ago, caught my eye. The sender was a high-end boutique jewelry designer based in the Diamond District. I tapped the email. A digital invoice filled the screen. Custom platinum band. 1.5 carat emerald cut diamond. Rush processing, total $4,250. Payment method Visa ending in 4419. My breath hitched. I pulled my own wallet from my robe pocket and pulled out my debit card. Visa ending in 4419. It was the debit card directly linked to our joint savings account. The account where we deposited our wedding money. The account meant for our son's college fund. He wasn't just buying her lingerie to string her along for a promotion. He was planning to propose. He was going to drain our savings, marry the boss's secretary, and use his new corporate power to leave me penniless and childless. I didn't cry. My hands didn't even tremble. I took screenshots of the invoice, the payment method, and the shipping address, Jessica's apartment, and emailed them directly to Mr. Sterling. Dissipation of marital assets, I typed in the subject line. I deleted the sent email from the iPad, cleared the background apps, and placed the device exactly where I found it on the nightstand. The next morning, the sun streamed through the bedroom blinds. Mark was already dressed, standing in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked rested, energized, and invincible. I walked out of the bathroom, holding my son against my shoulder. Mark turned. He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it onto the unmade bed. "My mother wants prime rib for dinner tonight," Mark said, checking his watch. "Go to the good butcher downtown. Don't buy that cheap supermarket meat." He walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. The arrogance from the night before was still practically radiating off his skin. "And remember what we talked about last night, Lydia," Mark said, tapping his briefcase against his leg. "Be a good, quiet wife. Keep the house clean. Because if you decide to act crazy, the lawyer is on speed dial. I have the money. I have the power. You have nothing." I shifted the baby's weight to my left arm. With my right hand, I casually reached across my chest to adjust the collar of my sweater. My index finger pressed firmly against the digital crown of my Apple Watch. A tiny, microscopic red dot appeared on the screen face. Recording. "Could you repeat that?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and slightly trembling, playing the part of the terrified, submissive victim perfectly. "You would really take him away from me," Mark scoffed, rolling his eyes. "In a heartbeat. You have no job, no money, and no leverage. I will drain the accounts, take the house, and leave you with nothing. Now do I need to explain it a third time? Or are you going to go buy the damn prime rib? I looked down at the tiny red dot securely logging every single word of his financial abuse and emotional blackmail into the cloud. I looked back up at him. I walked over my hand, reaching out to gently smooth the lapel of his expensive suit jacket. I understand, I said, offering him a sweet, flawless smile. Have a good day at work, Mark. The heavy-duty contractor bags were thick, made of industrial black plastic that didn't tear easily. I stood in the center of the master walk-in closet. Downstairs, the muffled synthetic sound of a daytime game show drifted up from the living room. Susan was exactly where she always was. I reached for the hanger holding Mark's charcoal gray Armani suit. I didn't rip it off the rack. I didn't take scissors to the fabric. Anger is loud and messy, but what I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was an absolute sub-zero clarity. I carefully unhooked the suit and dropped it into the black plastic bag. Next went the designer ties, then the expensive leather loafers. The crinkle of the thick plastic was the only sound in the quiet room. My phone vibrated in the back pocket of my jeans. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed Victoria's name. I swiped to answer and lifted it to my ear. I'm putting the phone face down on my desk. Victoria said immediately, her voice low and sharp. I've just buzzed Jessica to come into my office. Put your phone on mute and just listen. A small click echoed through the line. I pressed the mute button and sank onto the plush carpet of the closet floor, clutching the phone tightly. Through the speaker, I heard the heavy solid oak door of the CEO's office open, followed by the soft click of it shutting. You asked to see me, Victoria. Jessica's voice filtered through the phone. It was the same bright melodic voice I had heard in the Target aisle, though now it carried a professional, eager-to-please tone. Sit down, Jessica, Victoria commanded. Her voice had shifted. It was no longer the warm, protective tone she used with me. It was the absolute, frigid authority of an executive about to drop a guillotine. I heard the scrape of a leather chair. I want you to look at the photograph I just pushed across the desk, Victoria said evenly. 10 seconds of pure silence passed. I could almost picture Jessica's perfectly manicured hands picking up the glossy 5x7 photo. It was the picture from my wedding day. Mark and I smiling under a floral arch. Do you recognize the man, Jessica? Yes, Jessica said, her voice faltering slightly. That's Mark, from the sales team. And the woman? Victoria asked. I met her yesterday. Jessica stammered, the realization slowly beginning to suffocate her. He said she was a neighbor? That woman, Victoria said, her tone slicing through the air like a scalpel, is my closest friend. I consider her my little sister. And exactly 7 days ago, she was on an operating table having a C-section to deliver the son of the man you were shopping for silk pillowcases with. A sharp, audible gasp ripped through the phone line. It wasn't a fake gasp. It was the sound of a 24-year-old realizing she had just been played, humiliated, and unknowingly cast as the villain in a tragedy. He told me they were separated, Jessica whispered, her voice trembling dangerously close to tears. He swore the divorce papers were already filed. I didn't know. Victoria, I swear to God I didn't know. I know you didn't, Victoria replied coldly. You're young, Jessica. You're ambitious. But let this be a lesson. That man is using you to get a recommendation for the regional manager seat. Yesterday, he used his newborn son's savings account to put a down payment on a diamond ring to string you along. Oh my God, Jessica choked out. Get out of my office, Victoria said softly. And handle this. Because if I have to step in, it won't be pretty. The heavy oak door opened and slammed shut. A moment later, Victoria picked up the phone. Did you hear that? Loud and clear, I whispered. Give me 20 minutes. Victoria said, a dark amusement coloring her voice. She hung up. I went back to packing the garbage bags. I emptied his sock drawer. I emptied the bathroom cabinets, throwing his expensive colognes and shaving creams into the dark void of the plastic. I tied the first 3 bags tightly, leaving them in a neat row by the bedroom door. Exactly 22 minutes later, my phone chimed with a text message. It was a video file from Victoria pulled directly from the company's lobby security cameras. I tapped play. There was no audio, but the high-definition footage was perfectly clear. The camera was angled down at the bustling main lobby. Mark was walking toward the front doors holding his leather briefcase. He was wearing the light blue poplin shirt, the exact one he had demanded I iron the night before. He walked with his chest puffed out, flashing a charismatic smile at a passing executive. Suddenly, Jessica marched into the frame. She wasn't carrying a shopping bag this time. She was holding a massive, venti-sized iced coffee. Mark stopped, his smile widening as he saw her. He opened his mouth to speak, reaching a hand out toward her arm. Jessica didn't hesitate. Without breaking her stride, she raised the plastic cup and violently hurled the dark icy liquid directly at his chest. The dark coffee exploded across the pristine light blue poplin shirt, splashing up to his chin and soaking his silk tie. Even without sound, I could read the words Jessica screamed at him as he stood there completely stunned, dripping with brown liquid in the middle of a crowded corporate lobby. "You lying piece of trash!" She threw the empty plastic cup at his feet, turned on her heel, and stormed toward the elevators. Mark stood frozen. 3 senior executives walked past, staring at him with a mixture of pity and utter disgust. His face turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. He didn't try to wipe the coffee off. He simply turned around and practically ran out the revolving glass doors. I locked my phone screen. A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in a month. Downstairs, the front door rattled violently. The lock clicked, and the heavy wood slammed open so hard it hit the drywall with a massive thud. He was home. The heavy footsteps pounding up the carpeted stairs sounded like a frantic drumbeat. I didn't move from where I stood near the walk-in closet. The row of tied-off black contractor bags was hidden just out of sight behind the half-open closet door. The master bedroom door didn't just open, it was violently kicked inward. It slammed against the drywall, the brass doorknob leaving a deep, cracked dent in the paint. Mark stood in the doorway, chest heaving. The pristine light blue poplin shirt I had supposedly failed to iron was plastered to his skin, dripping with a dark, sticky mess. The heavy scent of burnt espresso sour milk and pure, unfiltered panic filled the room. His silk tie was ruined, hanging limply around his neck like a wet rag. For a second, we just stared at each other. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash, eyes wide and bloodshot. Then the shock morphed into a blind, explosive rage. "Look at this!" Mark roared, ripping the stained tie off his neck and hurling it across the room. It slapped against the mirror of my vanity, leaving a brown streak. He paced across the hardwood floor, running his trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair, completely ruining it. I had it. I was right there. I was practically sitting in the regional manager's chair, and that crazy bitch secretary just snapped. He kicked the edge of the laundry basket, sending it skidding across the room. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't confessing. He was looking for someone to blame. And as his bloodshot eyes locked onto my calm, silent face, he found his target. "This is your fault," Mark hissed, taking a threatening step toward me. He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "Ever since you got pregnant, my life has been a disaster. You sit around this house doing nothing, projecting all this miserable, negative energy. You're a jinx, Lydia. You're an anchor dragging me down. I try to network. I try to build a future for us. And the universe punishes me because I'm tied to a leech like you. Mark, sweetie, what's going on?" Susan appeared in the doorway, clutching her chest, out of breath from rushing up the stairs. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw her son covered in coffee, his face purple with rage. "Oh my God, look at you. What happened?" Susan gasped, rushing to his side and dabbing at his wet shirt with her bare hands. The corporate world happened, Mom. Mark barked, batting her hands away. I was sabotaged, and I know exactly why I have no luck. He slowly turned his head, glaring at me with a look of absolute, unadulterated hatred. Susan followed his gaze. The mask of the mildly annoying mother-in-law completely melted away, revealing the vicious enabler underneath. She looked at me as if I were a piece of garbage that had ruined her perfect son's life. This is what happens when a man has no peace at home. Susan spat, her voice trembling with righteous anger. A man cannot conquer the world if his wife is a useless burden. I told you, Mark. I told you she was too plain, too boring for a man with your ambition. She grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him slightly toward her. Kick her out, Mark. You don't need this dead weight dragging you to the bottom. I'll stay. I'll help you raise my grandson. We don't need her. Mark's chest rose and fell heavily. The corners of his mouth twitched into a cruel, desperate smile. He was losing his grip on his career, so he desperately needed to assert his absolute dominance here in this room. You know what, you're right, Mark sneered. He marched over to his leather briefcase, which he had dropped near the bedroom door. He unzipped it with so much force the metal teeth scraped loudly. He bypassed his ruined laptop and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. He walked back over to the bed and slapped the envelope onto the mattress. I'm done carrying you, Mark announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I saw a lawyer 3 weeks ago. It's a petition for dissolution of marriage with a request for full primary custody of the boy. I looked down at the manila envelope. I didn't say a word. My silence fueled his sick sense of empowerment. He thought I was paralyzed by fear. He thought he had finally broken me. I'm keeping the house, Lydia, Mark declared, crossing his arms over his coffee-stained chest, standing tall like a conquering king. I'm the one writing the $1,200 check to Oak Point Properties every single month. My name is on the lease. I am the legal tenant, which means you have absolutely no right to be here. He stepped closer, towering over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. Sign the papers, Mark ordered, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying whisper. You have 24 hours to pack your maternity clothes, call an Uber, and crawl back to your strict father. Maybe he'll finally teach you how to be a useful adult, because you are finished here. The room fell into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the central air conditioning and the rapid, excited breathing of Susan, who watched the execution with greedy, satisfied eyes. I looked at the manila envelope resting on the white duvet. I looked at the silver Mont Blanc pen Mark had pulled from his pocket and tossed onto the bed right next to the papers. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't well up with tears. I didn't fall to my knees and beg for my family. Instead, I took one slow, deliberate step toward the bed. I reached out my fingers, wrapping around the cold, smooth metal of the silver pen. The silver Mont Blanc pen felt cold and heavy in my hand. I didn't hesitate. I didn't let my hand tremble. I uncapped the pen, pressed the fine tip against the signature line of the dissolution of marriage petition, and signed my name. The scratch of the ink on the thick paper was the only sound in the room. I capped the pen and tossed it onto the mattress. Susan let out a long, theatrical sigh of relief. She crossed her arms, looking at me with a sickeningly triumphant smile. Well, at least you have the dignity to know when you're beaten, she muttered. Mark stood a little taller. The tension drained from his shoulders. He reached out to grab the manila envelope, eager to secure his victory. Leave it, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with the sharp, unyielding edge of a blade. Mark's hand froze midair. He frowned, looking at me as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started speaking. Excuse me. I turned my back to him and walked over to my solid oak nightstand. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the thick stack of documents I had prepared just hours ago. I walked back to the bed and dropped the stack directly on top of his divorce petition. I signed your papers. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Now you need to read yours. Mark stared at the documents. He let out a condescending scoff, but he reached down and picked up the top paper. It was a formal, legally binding document bearing the thick embossed seal of Sterling and Associates. Across the top, in bold capitalized letters, it read, 30-day notice to vacate premises. An eviction notice. Mark laughed. It was a genuine booming laugh of pure amusement. He looked at his mother, shaking his head. Are you out of your mind, Lydia? You can't evict me. My name is on the lease. I write the checks to Oak Point Properties. I am the legal tenant of this house. Read the second page, Mark, I said softly. He flipped the page. His eyes scanned the dense legal jargon until they hit the highlighted section at the bottom. The amusement vanished from his face, replaced by a deep, confusing crease between his brows. He read the line once. Then he read it again. Property owner and managing director of Oak Point Properties, LLC, Richard Vance. Richard Vance. Mark read aloud, his voice dropping to a confused whisper. That's your father's name? Yes, it is, I said, stepping closer to the bed. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I simply delivered the execution. My father owns this property, Mark. It is a subsidiary of his corporate holding company. It has been since before we were married. No, Mark stammered, taking a step back. The color began to drain from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. No, I pay the rent. I pay $1,200 a month. I'm the provider. You pay $1,200 a month. I agreed, nodding slowly. And on the first of every month, I quietly transfer an additional $2,400 from my personal savings account directly to my father's firm to cover the actual mortgage and property taxes. I subsidized your life, Mark. I paid for the illusion so you could play the big, successful man of the house. Susan gasped, taking a step back until her shoulders hit the doorframe. You lied to my son. I ignored her. My eyes remained locked on Mark. His coffee-stained shirt suddenly looked less like the casualty of a bad workday and more like the uniform of a beggar. This house is a premarital asset protected by a corporate shield. I continued, my voice steady and unrelenting. You have no equity here. You have zero ownership, which means, according to the state law cited in that packet the moment you filed for divorce and explicitly expressed intent to remove me, your tenancy was legally terminated due to marital hostility. Mr. Sterling had a judge sign off on an expedited order an hour ago. You can't do this, Mark choked out. His breathing became erratic, shallow gasps filling the quiet room. I'll fight it. I have money. I'll take the baby. You have a maxed-out Chase Sapphire card, I corrected him, and a joint savings account that you just drained by $4,250 yesterday afternoon. Mark's entire body jerked as if I had hit him with a physical taser. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. How? A custom platinum band. 1.5 carat emerald cut diamond. I recited the invoice from memory. Shipped directly to Jessica's apartment. I walked over to the closet. The heavy industrial black plastic of the contractor bags gleamed in the dim light. I grabbed the thick plastic drawstrings of the first 3 bags and dragged them out into the center of the bedroom. They hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, humiliating thud. Then I went back and dragged out 2 more. Your Armani suits? Your silk ties? Your golf shoes? I pointed to the first 3 bags. I then looked at Susan, who was staring at the black plastic with absolute horror. And your mother's things are in the other 2? Mark looked at the garbage bags. The reality of his situation finally crashed down on him, breaking through the thick, impenetrable walls of his narcissism. He had no house. He had no savings. He was standing in a ruined shirt, staring at his entire life, stuffed into garbage bags. Lydia, wait. Mark stammered, his hands shaking violently as he dropped the legal papers. The arrogant, commanding husband was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, pathetic little boy. "Wait, please. We can talk about this." I was angry. I didn't mean it. He reached into his pocket, his trembling fingers desperately fumbling for his phone. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll withdraw the petition. Just, just give me a second to think." Before he could even unlock the screen, his phone began to ring loudly in his hand. It wasn't his lawyer. The caller ID flashed in bright, bold letters, Victoria, CEO. The vibrant, blaring ringtone of Mark's phone cut through the heavy silence of the bedroom. The bright screen illuminated his pale, coffee-stained fingers. Victoria, CEO. Mark stared at the glowing letters. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. A desperate, almost manic glint returned to his eyes. He looked at the garbage bags, then up at me, his chest puffing out as he tried to construct one final flimsy wall of defense. "You think you've won." Mark spat, his voice shaking with a pathetic mix of rage and terror. He gripped the phone tightly. "You think kicking me out of this house means anything? I don't need this place. I'll buy a better one. I have money, Lydia. I have a career. I'm getting promoted to regional manager. I will hire a lawyer so vicious you'll be begging me for a settlement." I crossed my arms over my chest. I didn't flinch. "Answer it, Mark," I said calmly. "Put it on speaker." He hesitated. His thumb hovered over the green button. He wanted to ignore it to pretend he was still the king of his castle, but the conditioning of the corporate ladder was too strong. "You don't ignore a call from the CEO." He swiped the screen and tapped the speaker icon. "Victoria." Mark answered, his voice instantly, shifting into that smooth, polished, overly confident tone he reserved for his superiors. "Good afternoon. I was just about to call you regarding the regional portfolio." "Mark." Victoria's voice interrupted. The sound of her voice coming through the small phone speaker was absolute ice. There was no professional warmth. There was no opening pleasantry. "I am calling to inform you that effective immediately, your employment at Apex Logistics is terminated," Victoria stated. Mark's mouth fell open. He let out a breathless, choked sound. "What?" "Victoria, wait. There must be a misunderstanding. The portfolio. Your termination is non-negotiable and effective as of this exact minute." Victoria continued, cutting him off with surgical precision. "You are being dismissed for gross violations of the corporate code of conduct, including but not limited to the severe harassment of an executive assistant. Human Resources has already frozen your company accounts and revoked your building access." "Harassment!" Mark practically screamed, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "No, Jessica and I. It was mutual. We were just getting coffee. I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," Victoria said softly. "The HR termination packet has been sent to your personal email. I suggest you do not step foot near the corporate campus ever again. If you do, the security team has strict orders to involve law enforcement. Goodbye, Mark." The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stared at the black screen of his phone. The color entirely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, empty shell. "No," Mark whispered. His hands shook so violently the phone almost slipped from his grasp. "No, no, no. She can't do this. Jessica. Jessica will tell her." He frantically swiped at the screen, tapping Jessica's contact name. He brought the phone to his ear, his breathing ragged and loud. "Beep. Beep. Beep. We're sorry, the number you have reached is not in service." She had blocked him. The ambitious 24-year-old secretary he had bought a diamond ring for had realized he was a sinking ship and instantly severed the line. Mark dropped the phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter, the screen cracking down the center. His knees buckled. The man who just 30 minutes ago had stood over me and threatened to steal my child and throw me on the street collapsed onto the edge of the bed. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, guttural sob. He had lost his mistress. He had lost his savings. He had lost his high-paying job. He had lost his house. Mark. Susan's voice was barely a whisper. I looked over at my mother-in-law. The smug, entitled smirk she had worn for the past 7 days was completely eradicated. She was staring at her son with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't looking at him with a mother's pity. She was looking at him with the panic of a parasite that had just realized its host was dead. Susan had no retirement savings. She lived off Mark's perceived success. She had actively encouraged him to abandon me because she thought it would secure her a richer, more glamorous lifestyle with his new promotion. Now she was looking at a jobless homeless man with a maxed-out credit card. She slowly bent down and wrapped her arms around one of the black contractor bags containing her clothes. She hugged it to her chest as if it were a life preserver. I didn't offer them a tissue. I didn't offer a word of comfort or a life lesson. I walked past them, stepping carefully around the cracked cell phone on the floor. I walked to the bedroom window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the suburban street in a cool, dark blue. The streetlights flickered to life. I turned back to face the two strangers in my bedroom. I didn't yell. I simply raised my hand and pointed a single finger toward the open bedroom door. It took 3 separate trips to drag all 5 heavy contractor bags out the front door. I pushed the last black plastic bag over the threshold. It slumped onto the concrete porch, resting right next to the designer leather loafers Mark had worn to work that morning. Susan was already outside, standing on the lawn, shivering slightly in the evening breeze. She kept her arms tightly wrapped around her purse, staring blankly at the suburban street as if waiting to wake up from a terrible nightmare. Mark stood on the porch. He didn't try to stop me from moving the bags. The corporate execution delivered by Victoria had completely broken his spirit. He watched me with hollow, red-rimmed eyes. I stepped back inside. I didn't slam the heavy oak door. I pushed it shut until it clicked, and then I turned the brass deadbolt. For about 10 seconds there was absolute silence. Then the frantic pounding began. Thump, thump, thump. Lydia, please. Mark's voice was muffled through the thick wood, cracking with desperation. He jiggled the brass handle violently. Please open the door. We can fix this. I'm sorry, I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever you want. I stood in the entryway watching the doorknob rattle. Lydia, I'm his father. Mark sobbed loudly, pressing his face against the wood. Think of our son. You can't just throw me away like this. I have nowhere to go. My cards are frozen. Please. He was using the exact same weapon he had used against me for months. Our child. But this time, it didn't instill fear. It just confirmed exactly how pathetic he truly was. I reached out and unlatched the deadbolt. The pounding instantly stopped. I opened the door, but only 3 inches. The thick brass chain lock connecting the door to the frame remained securely fastened. Mark's face appeared in the narrow gap. The coffee stain on his light blue shirt had dried into a dark, crusty map of his failure. Tears and sweat streaked his cheeks. The arrogant, untouchable sales executive was entirely gone. Looking at him through that small crack in the door, I didn't feel anger or sadness or even pity. I just felt like I was looking at a stranger. Lydia. Mark gasped, his fingers grabbing the edge of the door, trying to pull it open against the chain. Thank God. Please let me in. It's getting cold. Just let me sleep on the couch tonight. We'll figure this out tomorrow. I looked at his desperate, gripping fingers. Then I looked him dead in the eyes. You wanted me to be your neighbor so badly this afternoon, I said. My voice was completely flat, carrying the quiet, absolute finality of a judge reading a sentence. Well, neighbors don't stand on my porch. Get off my property. Lydia, no. I pushed his fingers off the edge of the wood and shut the door. Click. The latch caught. Clack. The deadbolt slid into place. I took a step back. Outside, the pleading continued for a few more minutes, growing weaker and more pathetic until eventually there was nothing but the sound of an Uber pulling up to the curb, followed by the heavy silence of the night. I turned away from the door and walked into the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator, poured 4 ounces of formula into a glass bottle, and set it into the warmer. The machine hummed to life with a soft, comforting vibration. I walked upstairs, my bare feet sinking into the soft carpet. My abdomen still ached, but the suffocating, crushing weight that had lived on my chest for the past month was entirely gone. I entered the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of the star-shaped nightlight. I reached into the crib and gently lifted my son, cradling his warm, tiny body against my chest. He let out a soft sigh, nuzzling his face into my shoulder, completely safe and blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed. I sat down in the rocking chair, swaying back and forth in the quiet room. I had learned something today, something I would make sure to teach the little boy sleeping in my arms when he grew up. A cruel man's arrogance isn't his armor. It's just the death warrant he eagerly signs for himself. And sometimes the only thing you have to do to win is hand him the pen.